Hey, what is going on, you moss-covered Magby? I'm finally back from traveling and back to creating content here on the YouTube channel and the Twitch stream. In the secondary YouTube channel is AzulGG 2. Links for both those down in the description. I've been traveling a lot over the last 2 or 3 weeks. I was in Australia where I managed to win the Oceania International Championships, which was super dope. And then from there I went to Florida and then over to Knoxville Regionals. Did not do as well at Knoxville Regionals. Did make day 2, but ended at 120, a top 128 finish, which isn't great, but can't win them all. And now that I'm finally home, back to creating content, also the first major rotation tournament has happened over in Japan, and that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be taking a look at some of the lists that did well. I'm definitely pretty intrigued by the decks that are doing well over there, and I thought you guys might be as well. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some of them, talk about them, see what's going on. So let's go ahead and let's jump right into it. There was 3,000 players in this tournament. The first list, of course, we're looking at is the first place list from the tournament, and the way I'm going to be kind of doing this is going to be taking a look at the highest placing list of a deck, and then I'm going to be looking at another list of the deck that placed in the top 16. So all these lists are from the top 16. So this is the first place Lost Box list. And take a look at some of the cards that were missing here with rotation. No more Quick Ball, but now you have the Nest Ball in the deck. No more Ordinary Rod. So you see there is some Claras being included in the build as well. And it is a Mirage Gate build of Lost Box. So you have the, of course, the Sableye, the Cramorant, and the Greninja. And then you got the a little bit harder to set up attackers in the Snorlax, the Zamazenta, and the Raikou, but there is 4 Mirage Gate in this build. So overall, it looks like a pretty straightforward Lost Box deck. So it looks like Lost Box is still pretty good post-rotation. The only new card in this build, so like I said, Ordinary Rod's gone, Quick Ball's gone, but you have Nest Ball to replace the Quick Ball, and then you have Clara to kind of replace Ordinary Rod. Not quite as good as Ordinary Rod for sure, I would say. This list is also rocking Raihans and Boss's Orders, some other supporters, and it is a Sky Seal Stone build. Now, EXs are coming out in the latest set, but the only EXs that are good is just Gardevoir EX, I'm pretty sure. There's like no other good EXs. So Sky Seal Stone's still going to be pretty good when there's still stuff like Mew and Lugia and Giratina. Lost Zone Giratina is also pretty good that I heard, but it actually only had 1 place in the top 16, and there's no list for it yet. Otherwise, I would have reviewed that list as well. So the only new card in the list is the Beach Court, which makes the retreat cost of each player's basic Pokemon 1 colorless less. So it effectively gives most of your Pokemon free retreat, the Greninja, the Cramorant, the Sableye. The most important one is gives Comfey free retreat. And that can help you move some of your other Pokemon around. But mainly it's in here as basically an effective air balloon for your Comfey through a stadium card, which is not quite as good as an air balloon because a lot of decks like play stadiums that aren't Beach Court. So they're going to be able to replace your stadium like that, but it's kind of whatever. And then we can compare this. So this is the first place Lost Box list, and we can compare it to the top 4 Lost Box list. This one is quite a bit different. Once again, the only new card in the deck is the Beach Court. I guess one other thing that I'll mention about these lists is they don't play Ordinary Rod, but they are running pretty heavy energy recycler counts. 2 energy recycler in this build, just like this build as well. 2 energy recyclers. So instead of having the Ordinary Rod to recover your energy and then Mirage Gate the energy into play, now you have to go with the energy recycler, get the energy from the discard pile to the deck so you can actually Mirage Gate them into play and actually use your bigger attackers. Now this is also a Mirage Gate build. But it's kind of weird. There's like not that much stuff to Mirage Gate to. There's of course Greninja. You can always Mirage Gate to Sableye when you're attacking with Sableye. There is the Zapdos V in here as well, which you can Mirage Gate to. And then there's 2 Yveltal with the Cry of Destruction. I can only imagine this is probably like okay in the Mew matchup, but probably in here specifically for the Lugia matchup, I would imagine. And we'll take a look at some Lugia lists here in a second and kind of break those down as well. But like 2 Cry of Destruction Yveltal is really a big surprise to me. Like I don't understand why this is here, to be honest. It has to be for the Lugia match. It's the only thing I can imagine. But then I don't know why you wouldn't just kind of run like the first place list, like run the Raikou and like other attackers as well. I feel like that's like a better strategy to deal with Lugia overall. But maybe the Yveltals pull a little bit more weight in the format with how Lugia decks are built right now. Has the Drapion in here for the Mew matchup, of course. But then from there, you don't really have a ton of attackers that you would even use the Mirage Gates for. Like I said, you can use them to set up the Yveltals. Maybe you use Greninja, of course. And you can like push your Zapdos to a couple extra energy to potentially get an attack off with it if your opponent doesn't have too many V Pokemon in play. But the Mirage Gates don't feel as powerful in this build for sure. Overall, there's only 9 energy in the deck as well. Actually, I'm curious how many were in the other build. There's 11 in the first place build. So this is the top 4 list. This one is a little bit more curious for sure. It has a Roxanne in here as well. So this one is definitely pretty curious, to be honest, overall. I'm not blown away by this one. This one doesn't look as good as like the first place list. It kind of like makes sense to me that this is the first place list. This just looks better to me. In my opinion, the first place list definitely just looks like the better deck, to be honest. Yeah, so this one is just weird to me. This one just is a little bit weird to me. I just don't quite understand the Yveltal, and the Zapdos actually throws me off a little bit as well. I'm not sure quite what the Zapdos is super strong up against, but I'm sure there's something in the format. It can also just kind of hit hard, I guess. Like you can like 2-hit KO a Giratina VSTAR. I guess could be like a pretty powerful combo to do. You can like hit it with Cramorant and then follow up with the 170 from the Zapdos. That is the 280, and you combo that with the Sky Seal Stone, and then you're 2-hit KOing a Giratina VSTAR for 3 prize cards, which actually that seems pretty valuable to me. That seems like a pretty good line to potentially take. So maybe that's kind of the reason behind the Zapdos V. Let's take a look at the second place list, which is also a Gardevoir EX list. So most hype card coming out of Scarlet and Violet for sure, and it definitely seems like the best EX by far. Maybe the only viable EX to come out of Scarlet and Violet might be the Gardevoir EX. Miraidon EX I think had some hype for sure. I think it was doing pretty well at like local tournaments in Japan, but didn't really show up. 0 in top 16 of this major tournament. So I mean that's not an indication of it being truly terrible. Maybe the lists just need to be cooked up a little bit more, but yeah, it definitely seems like Gardevoir is the front runner for sure as far as the best EX goes. So first, let's take a look at the new cards in the deck. So I'll go over these real fast with you. Shuffle up to 5 Pokemon from your discard pile into your deck, and then draw 3 cards. So a little bit of a Pokemon recovery supporter card. And then we got the Arvin, which says search your deck for an item card and a tool card, and put them into your hand. Now, tool cards are now different from item cards. They're separated as into their own category. So searching for an item and a tool card. Searching for an item card sounds pretty good to have, potentially be able to help you set up rare candy combos specifically. And then for tool cards, it looks like the Gardevoir EX decks are starting to play Emergency Jelly. See, there's 2 in this list. This is a top 8 list. Also has Emergency Jelly, but only 1. So definitely interesting. The Emergency Jellies are definitely interesting. I'm not quite sure. I'd have to play some games in the format to see where the situations come up for the Emergency Jelly. I would assume it comes up based around the Gardevoir EX's ability. For those of you that don't know, Gardevoir EX, 310 HP. You may use his ability as often as you like during your turn. Attach 1 basic psychic energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon, and then put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. You can use it as often as you like. And then 190 for Psychic Color. So the attack is like, okay, it really is, all the power is truly coming from the ability, to be honest. So you could theoretically set up this Gardevoir, the 140 HP Gardevoir with the Shining Arcana ability. Once you're your turn, you may look at the top 2 cards of your deck, attach as many basic energy cards as you find there to your Pokemon any way you like, put the other cards into your hand, so you effectively just draw 2 cards. And it's got the Brainwave for triple colorless, 60 plus 30 for each psychic energy attached to this Pokemon. So theoretically, you could like use the Gardevoir EX to load up 6 energy onto your Gardevoir, leaving it with 20 HP left. And then you could attach an Emergency Jelly to it to heal it back up to full HP, and then use Brainwave for a ton of damage. You could do the same thing with the Zacian V as well. Zacian does 60, once again, 60 plus 30 for each psychic energy attached to the Pokemon. The reason you play the Zacian V in here is to combo with the Sky Seal Stone. I guess you could use it for some early game acceleration through its ability, but it doesn't seem that good. But you do have the Sky Seal Stone in here, so if you go up against like a Mew, Giratina VSTAR, you can combo Zacian V with a bunch of energy from the Gardevoir EX, plus the Sky Seal Stone, knock out stuff like Giratina VSTAR, Mew VMAX, stuff like that, to actually draw, you know, that extra prize card, get you that much further ahead on the prize exchange. And so Jelly, you could possibly combo with either of those Pokemon after you accelerate a ton of energy to them. Makes a little bit of sense to me. Talked about the new cards. It's a little bit interesting to see the differences in these Gardevoir builds. So this one actually plays the Mirage Step Curlier, which allows you for a Psychic Energy to search your deck for up to 3 Curlier and put them onto your bench and then shuffle your deck. So this allows you to like turn 2, Volvarotso Curlier, search for a bunch of other Curlias, and then you can kind of rare candy your Ralts into Gardevoirs and then evolve all your Curlias into Gardevoirs instead of evolving all your Ralts into Curlia. So it allows you to get out like a bunch more Gardevoir into play more aggressively, I feel like, which is interesting. So I kind of like the one of Mirage Step Curlia. But if we look at the other list that got top 8, there's no Mirage Step Curlia, only 2 Gardevoir. They also play the Supporter Search Glade with the Buddy Catch. It allows you to search your deck for any one supporter card once during your turn, which I think actually seems pretty decent, to be honest. They both rock one of Mew with the Mysterious Tail. Combos very well in the early game to help you find Battle VIP Pass, and you have so many ways to find it between your level balls and fog crystals that you can get it out like turn 1, retreat your active Ralts to it, or open it if you get that lucky, and then use Mysterious Tail to try and find Battle VIP Pass or something like that, or Red Candy for the next turn, whatever it might be. But this build doesn't play the Mirage Step Curlia, which is interesting to me because it feels like that's a super powerful card to potentially use. I guess maybe theoretically you're trying to get off a turn 2 Brainwave attack, but that seems kind of difficult to potentially pull off. You would need, there's only 2 rare candy in the list. So like this list specifically, there's only 2 rare candy, In this list, there's only 3 Rare Candy and only 2 Ultra Ball. This list only plays 1 Ultra Ball, so you don't actually have that many cards to combo the Rare Candy plus Stage 2 combo. So I feel like most of the time, you're taking that extra turn to evolve up through Kirlia to then get to your Gardevoirs on the next turn. That's another reason that the Mew's pretty good, is you can leave the Mew in the active for a turn to give up a prize card, get to use Mysterious Tail, and then you don't give your opponent one of your more important Pokemon for your turn. This list, the top 8 list, also plays the Articuno with the Cruel Charge, where you can play from your hand and then accelerate 2 basic or 2 psychic energy cards from your hand to this Pokemon. Of course, it has to be basic energy, but it doesn't specify basic energy. So you can accelerate a bunch of extra energy into play with the Articuno, and then you could even use it. I guess maybe you play it for the Psy Laser attack to do 120 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. I think that's maybe why you play, because you don't really need extra psychic energy in play. That doesn't really do anything for this deck. So it must just be for the snipe attack. Whereas this list, the second place list, plays this Cresselia with the Moon Glow reverse attack for 1 psychic energy. Now you could use the Lunar Laser for 110 damage for Psychic Side Colors, which I guess could come out, especially against like a Lost Box deck. I could see this being okay. But the Moon Glow reverse, move 2 damage cards from each of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So you can heal off some of your Pokemon that you've built up damage on with the Gardevoir EX's ability, or probably if you go up against like a Lost Box deck, you can heal off a bunch of damage that your opponent potentially puts in play with Sableye, is what I'm thinking that the Cresselia is a little bit more useful for. So the Cresselia is an interesting card in here. A split on the Ralts as well. You got the Teleportation Burst, which is Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon for a Psychic. Then you have the Mind Skip. Choose one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks, and your opponent's next turn that Pokemon can't use that attack with the Memory Skip. Probably doesn't really matter. You're not attacking with Ralts too much one way or the other. The Teleportation Burst seems a little bit more likely to be utilized. But it's interesting to see the differences here. No Gallade in this build as well. So there's a ton of one-of supporters. I think there's a little bit more in this list, like a one of Roxanne, one of Research, one of Thornton, one of Agatha. No Thornton in here, no Agatha. The Agatha is an interesting inclusion because you're going to build up damage on your active Pokemon through using your Gardevoir EX's ability, of course. And then you could move some of that damage off to your opponent's active Pokemon and then, heal yourself a little bit, do a little bit more damage for the turn. I don't know how often this would ever come up as being relevant, but it's definitely an interesting card to include, the Agatha. I'm not sure how good that actually is. And of course, probably, I didn't even realize that, for some reason when I was thinking about Gardevoir decks, I didn't even realize, but we have Radiant Greninja. Radiant Greninja is absolutely absurd in this deck. I don't even realize why I didn't realize that Radiant Greninja was still legal on rotation. But yeah, a ton of one-of supporters in both of these lists. The lack of Gallade in the second place list, though, is interesting with how many one-of supporters there are. Like one Serena, I don't remember what this supporter's called. Miriam, one of Miriam, one of Arvin, one of Worker. The Worker's like an interesting inclusion. Makes a little like it makes sense because like Pats of the Peak definitely is going to be an annoying card. Definitely, and there's a ton of draw power in this deck as well. So even though you don't have the Gallade to specifically search out that one-of supporter, between Refinement and the Shining Arcana, you're going to see a lot of cards every single turn. So the Worker being like a viable supporter is kind of funny. Draw 3, discard a Stadium in play. Of course, Pats of the Peak going to be a little bit annoying because you do want to make sure you can be using your Gardevoir's EX's ability consistently. So yeah, having that the Worker another way to bump stadiums besides your stadium inclusions is interesting. Makes a little bit more sense with the Gallade, of course, because you can use the Buddy Catch to search out the Worker to bump the stadium to get access to your Gardevoir EX's ability again, and also the Radiant Greninja as well. So that's interesting. So yeah, the Gardevoir list so far, interesting. See a couple different takes on them. Low on like the lack of Rare Candy and Ultra Ball is interesting. Specifically in this build, like I said, the lack of the Mirage Step Kirlia is definitely interesting because I felt like that would be something you definitely want to include at least as a one of, maybe even a two of, because it feels like it's a very powerful play to pull off on your second turn. Set up a bunch of Kirlia and then be able to Rare Candy your Ralts into Gardevoirs, and then evolve your Kirlias into Gardevoirs or Gallade, and have just like that many more evolutions in play that much more aggressively. Because it feels like even if you're not using the Mirage Step Kirlia, you're still waiting until that third turn to evolve your Kirlias into Gardevoirs if you don't get like a lucky Rare Candy combo. Because even look at this list, there's only 2 Rare Candy and 1 Ultra Ball. So the chance to draw into the combination of the Rare Candy plus one of your Stage 2 Pokemon and pull off like a turn 2 attack is not very high, I would say. So definitely interesting on the Gardevoir list so far. That kind of covers everything I want to talk about. Temple of Sinnoh seems to be the stadium of choice. I guess I'd mention that. There's the second place list had a one of Temple of Sinnoh, one of Collapse Stadium. A little bit heavier on the emergency jellies. And then the top 8 list only had 2 Temple of Sinnohs. And of course, they're probably playing that for the Lugia matchup, which we'll talk about next. Lugia does survive rotation, it appears, despite losing Powerful Energy, Capture Energy, Aurora Energy. Do they lose any other energy? They lose a lot of energy, but it does look like they survive rotation in this kind of pseudo single strike build These are two lists. This is the a top 8 list and a top 16 list. Both are pretty similar as far as the attackers goes. You know, 4-3 Lugia, 2 Tyranitar, 2 Stone Journey. I think someone played a 4-4 Lugia, Pumpkaboo, Drapion, Luminions in both. Now, the difference here is there's a Dunsparce in this build. Dunsparce does make sense if Lost Box decks are playing Raikou V, of course, so the Dunsparce makes sense to me. No Manaphy in either build, which is interesting. But I guess there's a lot of a threat of snipe attackers. Maybe now, maybe Manaphy's not worth it. Both of the Pumpkaboo, of course. This one plays a Radiant Serena, which is interesting because, I mean, I don't know. I guess against Lost Box is what I'm thinking. Like, healing that 20 damage could make a difference over time. You know, Cram hits something, that thing makes its way to the bench. You start to heal it with Serena, and then Sableye is not going to be able to pick it off as aggressively as the game continues. But both these decks heavily revolve around having the backup of these single strike attackers in them. So you got 4 double turbo. You got 2 gift energy, 2 lucky energy, 2 V-Guard energy. The lucky energy is interesting. And you have 4 single strike energy. So you're going to be able to attack with the T-Tar V, which does 250 damage, I believe, for dark, double colorless, 240 damage. And then it discards the top 4 cards of your deck, which is not great. But I think the reason this is played, then also has that Cragalanche for 60 for dark colors. Discards the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. But I think the reason you're kind of rocking the T-Tar is you need a way to one-hit KO Gardevoir EX, which Lugia can't do anymore now that there's no powerful energy in the format. So you have to rely on the T-Tar to get to that one-hit KO because Gardevoir is weak to dark. Gardevoir is weak to dark. I just have to check and make sure. You also have Drapion in here, I guess, as well. You could just like set up your Drapion and use Drapion. So maybe that's the better way to go. I guess you also just want like a heavy hitter, though. If you go up against like a Lost Zone Giratina or something like that, you need something to one-hit KO Lost Zone Giratina. And with this, all the single strike stuff in here, you know, the single strike energy, you do get to play a special energy recovery card, which is something that Lugia definitely would have loved to play pre-rotation. Now it's going to play in these post-rotation builds with the Urn of Vitality. You got the Urn of Vitality in here. It only does recover single strike energy, but that's better than nothing. So you got the Urn of Vitality, cover some single strike energy for your T-Tars, and it also plays 2 Stone Journer in here. That does 120 damage for fighting colorless. 120. Can't use Giga Hammer during the next turn, but I assume this is in here kind of as like a prize trade up against like Lost Box decks. You want to KO pretty much everything in the Lost Box deck with the Stone Journer. It's only worth 1 prize card. I'd imagine that's where this kind of slots in, but even actually trading off, I guess, with potentially the smaller Gardevoirs, because they're not resistant to fighting. They only have 140 HP, so Stone Journer can come up there and actually trade back and forth with the 1 prize Gardevoirs, actually. So that's maybe why you play the Stone Journers. You're almost like a 1 prize. You're almost like a single strike 1 prize deck. That's actually kind of interesting how this build is built. The only new card in this deck is the Mesagoza Stadium. Once during each player's turn, that player may flip a coin. If heads, they may search the deck for a Pokemon card and put it into their hand, then shuffle their deck. So you're giving your opponent a little bit of an advantage. And this Pokemon plays a ton of Pokemon Search. 4 Ultra Ball, 2 Nest Ball, 4 Capturing Aroma actually before 4 Nest Ball is interesting, but you do need to find your Archeops and get them in the discard pile. And then not only does it have the Mesagozas as ways to find Archeops and hopefully then discard them to the discard pile, it also plays 2 Professor Burnett. And I think both lists, this list only plays 1 Professor Burnett. Still has the 4 Capturing Aroma, 4 Ultra Ball, 2 Nest Ball. We did lose Evolution Incense, and one of the hardest things to do with the Lugia deck consistently would be getting both your Archeops in the discard pile. So going to the heavy Burnett count does make sense, because that is kind of the hardest thing to do with the Lugia deck. And Burnett does that, does it very well. Now that you don't have Evolution Incense to consistently find your Archeops as often, the Burnett just kind of makes sense. So, I guess we're going to be playing Burnett in our Lugia decks come rotation. And very similar on the energy count. Like I said, the attacker lineup is about the same. So, seems to be solidified. This might be the best way to play Lugia come rotation. Definitely an interesting build. Definitely curious to try out some other stuff though when rotation does hit. I'm sure there should be like a couple other ways to play Lugia, but yeah, maybe this kind of pseudo single strike Lugia build is just gonna have to be the way to go. And all of these decks are rocking. Most of these decks, besides the Gardevoir decks, Gardevoir decks are not rocking the Drapion, but both Lost Box rock Drapion. And then both of these Lugia decks are rocking Drapion. And that's because Mew definitely still seems to be a pretty prevalent deck in the format. This is the top 4 list, which the thing that stuck out to me the most was the 1 Meloetta, but still playing like 4 Fusion Energy and the Elsa Sparkle, but only 1 Meloetta. That was like super curious to me. So Mew seems to still be pretty good. That's why everyone still has Drapion in most of their decks. And Fusion Mew seems like it could be the way to go. This is the top 4 list. Now the top 16 list was not a Fusion Mew build, just a classic, or I guess what has become the more classic 4 DTE build. Can you call it that? Classic? I don't know. But just 4 DTE in this build, no fusion. But take a look at the fusion list real fast. Nothing stands out too much. We lost Quick Ball, of course, but we got Nest Ball, Feather Ball. They're not maxing out the Nest Ball, though, which is interesting. It does maybe make sense because Nest Ball actually isn't that good. Because if you fill up your bench, as you draw cards, as you draw into Nest Balls after your bench is full, you can't burn Nest Balls anymore. But then I would maybe would have expected a higher Feather Ball count, but also only 1 Feather Ball in this build as well. So if you compare it to lists, pre-rotation, there would have been 4 Quick Ball in here. So it's just like opened up 2 spots, but now there's 2 less ways to find Pokemon on your initial search, which is interesting to me. I feel like maybe there should be a higher Feather Ball count. At the very least, I definitely think there should be a second Meloetta. Prizing your Meloetta when you go second sounds not very good. I don't know how I feel about that. Yeah, the 1 Meloetta is kind of throwing me off for sure. There's also an Arven in here. Search your deck for an item card and a tool card. And because of Forest Seal Stone, the Arven can become basically any card in your deck plus, or it'll become the tool card and then it'll become any other item card to combo for the turn, which can become any card. So you can go Arven for Seal Stone, for Seal Stone, for Fusion Strike Energy, for Double Turbo Energy. I guess those are like the main things you'd want to find. Maybe Pat to the Peak, whatever. You can just do that to find anything. And then you get an item alongside it as well. So this seems like a pretty powerful card in Mew. Maybe it's not worth playing your supporter for the turn. Maybe you'd still rather Judge or Boss or Roxanne or something like that. So this might not be worth the space, but it does seem pretty powerful overall when you can search for the Forest Seal Stone, which I haven't searched for anything. But it does take up your supporter for the turn, so I'm not sure how I feel about that. And this build specifically, as well as this build, very heavy on the Pat to the Peak. 3 Pat to the Peak in both builds, and plenty of ways to bump the Pat to the Peak in the 4 lost vacuums in both lists. Both lists play 3 Pat to the Peak, 4 lost vacuums. So really trying to have as much ability control as possible, probably for the Gardevoir matchup. I would assume shut down that Gardevoir EX as aggressively as possible, I would imagine, is the reason behind the heavy Pat to the Peak, heavy lost vacuum. You want to make sure you, of course, can be using your own abilities during your turn. So you want to vacuum away the path once your opponent passes back to you. This build plays the cross switchers. Of course, it's a little bit harder to fit cross switchers in when you're rocking the Fusion Strike package, like the higher placing list here, the top 4 list. Yeah, Mew doesn't really change too much, I don't think, overall. It doesn't seem like it changes too much. And it seems like Fusion is definitely still a pretty viable way to rock it. And that's going to do it. That's all the decks I want to talk about. Like I mentioned, there was a Giratina Lost Zone in the top 16, and I would have talked about it. We would have taken a look at it, but the list isn't available right now. I guess the last thing to mention is there's an Avery in this build of Mew, which does seem pretty good. If you go up against one of those Gardevoir decks and they got, if they use like Mirage Step and they load up their bench with Ralts and Curlias and they got the Greninja in play, and it's like, okay, Avery, and they have to pick 2 of those things to discard. That actually seems pretty strong overall, to be honest. The Avery actually seems like it could be pretty good in Mew. But yeah, overall, I'm not too blown away by what we've seen from this tournament, specifically with rotation. 4 decks in the top 16 besides the 1 Lost Zone Tina. And I mean, all the lists just look like they're struggling. I don't know. That's the best way for me to explain it. When I looked at the Lost Box lists, the Gardevoir list, of course, when rotation hits, you're going to have less cards to work with. So you're going to have to make do with what you have left. But it just looks like all the decks are struggling and like piecing little things together to try and make up for the fact of what we did lose with rotation, which I guess makes sense. We lost cards, so you got to make do with what is left. But yeah, I'm not blown away by the kind of, I thought there would be a little bit more variety maybe potentially, but of course, once again, I guess that makes sense. It is rotation. We're losing cards, we're not gaining cards. But Lugia's been so dominant for so long, and was such a big part of the meta. It felt like we were in like a pretty narrow meta pre-rotation. Now post-rotation, it doesn't seem like we're kind of leaving that more narrow meta potentially, which is like Lost Box, Guardy, Lugia, and Mew were all of the top 16 decks besides the 1 Lost Zone Tina. No Miraidon in the top 16. Only 1 Lost Zone Tina. I feel like the 2 most hyped decks that I had heard about leading up to this first major tournament post-rotation was Miraidon EX and Lost Zone Tina, and then kind of let down by that. But it was just the first tournament, so maybe there's more to come out of this format than just this first tournament. Hopefully there is. I'm hoping for it. I can't wait to get my hands on the new format. I'm coming up at the end of the month, but that's going to do it for me. Took a look at these lists from the first big major post-rotation tournament in Japan, and I'm back. So I'll catch y'all soon in another video. Peace.